Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today we're getting back to work on our Chevy Nova. I'm going to try to get the exhaust loosened up and the transmission mount loose and get started, get it ready to pull the engine out. Probably won't get the engine bolts done this quickly, but if we get the engine bolts done pretty quick, then we'll start pulling the motor out. So follow along. We're underneath the car. This is the first time I've been under this car, and my brother-in-law and father-in-law put this engine and transmission in. Like I said before, the transmission has been rebuilt. It looks like it's got some nice new parts on it. I'm not sure where the drive shaft came from. It might have come from a donor car, but it might have been the one that was in this car originally. But they just put this engine and transmission in here in a couple of months maybe. And so since we're going to try to do work on the subframe, of course we're going to get the motor out and the tranny out. But first thing we got to do is attack those exhaust bolts and get this exhaust removed. And then from there we're going to take the transmission loose from the cross member, which I can't get in here really good. It's really low where we got this car set. Even though I've got it jacked up and on jack stands, it's still pretty tight. But that's brand new bolts that went into the transmission mount, and there was new bolts put on the back of the drive shaft, so those should be fairly easy to get out. But these exhaust bolts may not be quite so easy. I can't get a good shot of it. There they are. So instead of sitting around and messing around and talking, I'm gonna go ahead and get started. All right. Right now, basically there's just a wire holding these two pipes up at the back. I've got a bolt on the far side, on the passenger side. This side, the bolts come out pretty quick and easy. Actually, they're all come out quick. A little bit of WD. It hasn't been that long since they put this exhaust on here, of course, and they only strapped it up to transport it over here. So as soon as I cut that little strap, this pipe should fall completely off, and that other pipe will hang off the last bolt, or the last nut, not bolt, but the last nut. And there you go. It won't take much to get them down now. And then we'll try to move on to the next thing. All right, got the exhaust pipes loose, got them out. These look like, I don't know, probably an exhaust shop done them from the looks of those bends. Just 2-inch pipe and whatever off-the-shelf muffler they had that day, probably. Not a bad system for what it was on or anything, but we're going to upgrade that, go a little bit bigger and a little more aggressive on the muffler. So now we're going to move on to getting the drive shaft out. All right, we're back here at the rear end. Rear end itself is pretty crusty. This car happens to have monoshock or monospring leafs on it versus a multi-leaf spring, and they're wore out because the ride height in the back of this thing is terrible. It's really low. But if you come up here, even though the U-joint itself is pretty old, there's new bolts, or new nuts, excuse me, on those straps. So this should be fairly easy to get apart. Be back in a minute. Okay, there you have it. Drive shaft's out. I know it's hard to see there. There's the back of the transmission. I just got a few more things to take off there, and we'll have it pretty much out. So from there, sorry about the camera angle, but from there, then we'll start trying to get the motor mounts loose. And I don't think there's any electrical hooked up on this car to the motor. There is a speedometer cable there hooked up to the transmission, but I know there's not a shifter hooked up yet, so it should be pretty easy to get this all loose and out. So we'll come back here shortly. All right, as you can see, this is the bottom of the cross member for the transmission. I got the bolts out for the tranny mount, and I got the bolts for the cross member loosened up. I don't have them taken out yet because I don't have my engine hoist here yet, but as soon as I get that hoist here, then I'll put a jack underneath this transmission pan and I'll pick it up, take this bolt loose and get this cross member out of the way, and then I'll start pulling that motor out. Motor and tranny, sorry, I keep saying just motor, but it is the motor and the tranny both that are coming out. So I'll be back with that in just a minute. Okay, probably ain't gonna be able to see this. We got the nuts off the motor mount bolts. This mount, this bolt's actually loose. This one's still tight, but we got those loose. I think now I'm gonna take the fan off, and if I have time after we get that done, then I'm gonna try to take the steering rag joint loose if I can figure out how to do it. I think I may have to wait a while, spray it down and let it set, because it's pretty rusty. So, but in order to take the front subframe off, I think I got to have that loose. So I'll probably just spray that and let it sit for overnight, come back out here tomorrow and try to get it off. But I'm gonna try to go ahead and get this fan off, get it out of the way so I'm not getting chopped up by it while I'm trying to lift the motor out and stuff. I'm gonna get my fingers caught in that thing. So I'll be back in a minute. All right, been a few minutes. Got the fan off. Fan the bolt pulley off of it. The belt, loosened up the alternator to get the belt off. Like I said before, that rag joint needs to soak before I can get it apart. And figure while I'm at it, start this spraying the cross bolts and everything on both the upper A arms and the shock mounts, because once I get this motor and tranny out, and I still haven't made up my mind if I'm going to take the suspension off the subframe before I pull the frame loose from the car, because it'd be a lot lighter that way. But the other possibility is I leave the wheels and tires and suspension on it, and then just roll it from here over to where I can work on it and get it cleaned up. So we still got quite a bit more to work to do to get to that point, though. I know I keep saying, yeah, I'm going to get this out and I'm going to do that, but I'm working slow. And so it will eventually get done.